I'm going to use some like theological terms because that's just the way that I think, but there's this concept of the difference between orthodoxy and orthopraxy. So orthodoxy is right beliefs, orthopraxy is right actions, and in a lot of theology, especially Western theology, we tend to start with orthodoxy, what are the right beliefs, and then how do those right beliefs affect our actions. And a lot of Latin American theologians have challenged that and said, actually, we should start with right actions. We should do what Jesus told us to do, and then our beliefs, our orthodoxy actually comes out of that. There's not a right or wrong. There's just different ways to approach our faith. And so a lot of times as I process with people that are, they can often approach strategy from the orthodoxy to orthopraxy, where we start with what's the strategy, what's the big picture, and then how does that influence what we're doing? That's the way that I think, and that's the way that I develop strategy in terms of crossing. A lot of folks are that way. But as I start talking to you, Sherry, what I love is that you are saying, what are we doing? What are we doing well? And how is that influencing then the conversations? How does that speak to, how do we go from the ground up and allow our practice to really influence our strategy rather than the other way around? And so I thought that in of itself was a kind of a light bulb of, wow, that, we need to remind one another. There are lots of different ways to slice this pie. We may sit and hear somebody talk about strategy and go, man, that's just not the way that I function. That's not the way my church functions. Well, starting with strategy doesn't have to be the way you start. It can be engaging in action that we know our church is called to and allowing that to speak into it. And so that's kind of what you've done and what's been created in these the two documents here, kind of the overview of the vision and guidelines, and then kind of one of the practical ways you've seen that fleshed out is through this Matthew 25 prayer focus. And so I just want you to share, we'll kind of start with the vision and guidelines for how you do missions. And talk us through this document and the different elements of this. So start by giving us kind of the mission. The part in gray is what you were kind of handed from Aaron Barner. So talk through some of those pieces for us and how you think about that.
Okay, well, about 3 years ago, I was thinking we need to have something written down as what our strategy is. And I looked at all the things about how to do strategy, and I thought, I don't like any of those. I tend to not follow the normal path. But I looked at what we had, and the mission statement had 4 components. It was connecting people to resources, education, and local and global experiences, and to encourage people to engage in missional living. So those 4 components, connecting to resources, providing the education and opportunities in the community, I looked at what are we doing in those areas. And we were doing a lot of things. And so we wanted to include that in whatever we did. Resources, not just financial resources for people, but also when people come in, what resources do we know that we can refer them to? Education, and we'll get into Matthew 25, but one thing is, I noticed a lot of times people would say things, and I'm thinking, where did they get that? Because they're not really aware of what is happening in our community or in the world. And so how can we provide information that they can connect with and better understand what is happening rather than just, this is what I've heard.
An example would be like the refugee issue, because Wichita was one of the places where people were landing, and so the congregation was starting to have that conversation, helping to educate them on what is an actual refugee versus an immigrant, and how are those things different.
And who's coming to Wichita, and where are they coming from, and meeting them face to face, because that's key. If you get to know somebody, it's a lot easier to understand where they're coming from. So a lot of that, and then I looked at what we're doing globally and locally, and I didn't want to get rid of any of our ministry partners because we definitely have good connections. So how do I pull all of it together to make it a cohesive strategy that makes sense? And so sometimes I'm not sure it makes sense, but it's pull it together the way it makes sense to me. So that's kind of our mission statement. I loved what Pastor Aaron had done with the mindset and values, and he did live the mission, and it's LIVE. First, it says, love, we don't need to be the heroes. It's that we can just provide love and encouragement to our partner ministries. And I found a lot of times when we have somebody walk through the door, and we can always provide the love and encouragement and accept them where they are, but we can't always help them. But we're trying to find what people are doing in Wichita. How can we refer people? Who should we refer them to rather than say, oh, call this, this, and this? Okay, what fits for their story? So that's kind of the first thing. investigate, when we partner with somebody, we want to know they have the same values, or at least similar values, and what they're teaching, what they're doing, that it fits in with our church mission. So we do partner officially with quite a few partners, but unofficially with some others as well. We don't give them monthly financial needs, but if they have an event or something, we'll promote it, or we'll send volunteers. So we have a lot of good relationships with people in the community. Volunteer, this has been challenging. Abby's I just got Abby a year ago as a full-time assistant, and it's been wonderful. That we think differently sometimes too, so we can kind of collaborate and come up with these ideas. But volunteering has been an issue, trying to get people out the door. We have 18 ministries in the church. 17 of those are bringing people in the door, which is great. And but what about the people that won't come to the church? And that's where we are. We're global and community outreach, so we're going out to people that may not necessarily come to the church. So that's the difference. So trying to get people outside of our door to volunteer has been challenging, and we're working on that. Sometimes we have a good turnout, sometimes not.
You're not alone.
Yeah.
In case you didn't know.
But I might just throw in, we did with volunteers, I was thinking some people just don't feel comfortable going out to church, so we have 3 tiers.
Yeah, talk through that, because we were going to talk about that, but I think you can talk through that right now. I think that's really helpful.
That we thought, okay, we have a lot of big events in the church. Coming up is our Thanksgiving distribution. We give out 2,700 turkeys and bags of groceries to the community. We need lots of volunteers. We get 300 or 400 people to show up for that event. In fact, we had to limit the number of volunteers because there were just too many. We did the Hunger Challenge. We had 300 volunteers show up to pack food. We collect cookies for the prisons. We collect 27,000 cookies coming up in December and bag those out. So getting people to come into the church and volunteer in a missions area is easy. And we usually have an abundance of volunteers. That's tier 1. Get people involved there. Tier 2 is let's get those people then out in the community. But tier 2 is a safe volunteer opportunity. Go as a life group, do a one-time volunteer event, getting people out the door. And what we found with some people is they volunteer with an organization, think, oh, I love this organization, and then they continue on. But tier 2 is, okay, how do you guys feel comfortable doing this? And then they sign up for where they want to start. Tier 3 is long-term. It's things like mentoring, getting really involved with organizations, and actually being a part of that organization in the community. So that's kind of where we plugged in, and like I said, a lot of tier 1s.
Yeah.
And we're working on the others, so it's growing.
And you think about that both in your local and your global outreach as well, right? So what does it look like on a global level?
Okay, again, we have mission trip levels. And who we accept on mission trips kind of depends on where they are. Level 1 is in the U.S. So we do mission trips. Summer Vision, our youth just did a trip to Colorado, here in what city it was. But it's safe. You're in the U.S., you don't have to travel that far. You know what you're doing, usually have a place that you're going to stay. So it's safe and usually not as expensive. Tier 2 depends on what type of trip it is. Building trip, like we consider tier 2, but of course you want somebody that can pick up a brick. That's why I don't go on the building trips. Abby's gotten several of those. But also Children of Promise, a lot of those because it's very well organized. Depending on the country, Pakistan, I probably wouldn't have everybody going to Pakistan. But like when we went to Africa or things, I would consider level 2. So people that maybe have not traveled outside the U.S., but it's usually pretty well organized, pretty easy. Tier 3 is we would want people that have a level of maturity that may have been outside of the country or are experienced in some level. And that would be things like if we go to Lebanon, even though it's well organized, you don't want somebody just wandering off on their own. If we went to Pakistan, Rwanda, I think we considered a tier 3 just because you didn't know where you were staying. And it was kind of an individual trip where we weren't going with an organization. So again, so people would say, what's the level of physical labor? What's the level of travel? What's your level?
So trying to help kind of guide people through that process so that they can figure out where they might fit in with the work the church is doing.
Right, and we would also have to evaluate if I had somebody that wanted to go to Lebanon, and there's no way I would take this woman to Lebanon. No way. So we have to do some evaluation too. Are they ready for this type of trip?
What's it like if you tell someone no, like that lady?
What's that?
When you tell someone, I'm sorry, you're not going to Lebanon, right? Like what is that?
Well, I was fortunate because I was trying to think of how to diplomatically tell her that, and then COVID hit, so we didn't.
Oh, there you go.
So I haven't, but yeah, it's just saying.
She arranged
you
it, and then.
do what you have to do. But I was.
Because you have a system, people are good at self-selecting in a lot of ways too.
Right, and I probably would say, hey, you can't do all the trips, this might be a good trip for you.
Yeah.
So love, investigate, volunteer, and the last one's educate.
Educate, and that's again where Matthew 25 comes in. Part of it is, Kyle came and spoke at our church. It's like, learning who our ministry partners are, what they do. Matthew 25 is, what are the issues surrounding us and around the world? And learning more about those and how to be involved.
We're going to talk more about that in just a second because there's a whole handout that I think does a great job of explaining that.
Okay.
So then you have this, this is something that Aaron Varner put together, and then you began to kind of talk through these goals, principles. So talk us through the way that you took what you already had and began to kind of piece together this strategy.
Okay. And first of all, I'm an idealist. I'm a big picture person. I'm not really great at putting, okay, let's come back down to earth and figure all this out. That's Abby's job. But one of the goals, and one thing that bothered me with all the things that are good strategies, you pick the 2 or 3 things you're going to do well. Okay, I want people to be able to do what they feel passionate about. And if they come in and say, I really want to work with the homeless, well, we're not working with the homeless, but hey, we're doing these kids ministries and different things. And so that bothered me, and I thought, I want somehow to have it so they can do what they're passionate about in an organized way that fits in. I looked at different churches. I probably checked a lot of your websites out to see what are people doing, because steal ideas. I looked at
This is a place of stealing ideas.
I looked at Saddleback Church, because they have hundreds of ministries, and pretty much what they did is somebody came in and said, hey, you should be doing this. They said, okay, do it. And then they posted that. And I thought, but this is just too much. It's overwhelming to see all these hundreds of ministries. How do I pick what I want to do? So kind of a combination, and that's where, again, we came up with certain issues like the refugees, what have we done, Abby? Human trafficking,
Persecuted church.
persecution of the church,
Kids, homelessness.
we did foster kids, and then our next one's going to be on homelessness. So those are the areas we're focusing on now, and we'll add a couple more, I think, next year. But see, how can we get people to be aware of what is actually happening? Not what you hear on the news, not what you've grown up with stereotypes, but what is actually happening. And how can you be involved and how can you pray? So that's the first part. So it's hopefully almost everything that people want to do can fall in one of those categories. And then we work with different ministries in those areas. So like with kids, we work with people that work with foster kids, and then globally, Children of Promise. We work with Youth Horizons that works with at-risk youth. So we can pull all those together in one area. Hey, I want to work with at-risk kids. Here's some options. So, the second one's my idealistic view, because I want everybody in our church, when somebody walks through our door, to be able to see them as somebody that God loves. Not as, oh no, another homeless person. But who is this person in their story? To see the big picture. Even with refugees, I know it's like, oh my gosh, this whole world, all these refugees, and yet to see what's God doing. God's moving people. God's bringing refugees to us. We don't even have to go out the country. So, but people to see the world differently. Sometimes we get our stereotypes. We grow up hearing certain things. I just want to open the minds and see things more. God loves every person that walks that door, regardless of who they are, what they've done, or where they've been. So we don't have to accept all that, but we should show them love.
So then as you started to create this, the next page, you went through kind of these, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different kind of steps. Talk us briefly through some of those pieces as well. So principles, inventory, kind of what was your trajectory, your timeline, dates, but the trajectory you went through for this.
And this is a work in progress. So in fact, when Andrew asked me about strategy, I thought, I better write something down, because we do have a strategy. So it's a work in progress, and we haven't done all these things. The first one is, of course, we want values as a Christian and as a church. We want those to be followed. So we don't want to enable people, we want to empower people. So when we're looking at ministries we support, what are they doing in that area? We want to provide training so people are prepared to deal with different groups. And our goal is to take people out of the church into the community. Again, we've had people say before, I sat at the back of the church for an hour because I didn't feel comfortable walking into a church. We wanted those people to see that that we care about them. And they may not come to our church, they may. Or they may go to another church, or it doesn't matter, but it's just to take the church as a whole to the people. And again, fall in line with our basic statements.
And so after you created some of those kind of principles that you had, you started to look at kind of what your scope was of ministry and methods and resources and relationships.
And also what our ministry partners are doing and how does that fit in with that. So, and fortunately, I think all of our ministry partners fit into that, our value system. Then I looked to see what we had. Okay, we haven't had a mission committee, and we still don't really, except Abby and me. But pretty much the mission pastor or whoever's over missions decide this is what we're going to do. And again, I wanted to open that up more so that everybody that walked in the church could feel like they could be a part of doing something. Not necessarily, okay, our church focuses a lot on kids, so it's like we want to be the church that loves kids. And that's great. But we also want to be the church that loves the homeless people walking through the door and the people that are in traffic and so many different things. So I wanted to kind of expand that, not to just my passion. My passion is refugees, so we did Matthew 25 first on refugees. I can throw that in there, but the things that people feel passionate about and provide that training. We work a lot with ministry partners. A lot of times they're doing it. We work with other churches. We belong to a group called Wichita Area Mission Leaders that are all denominations that we meet together and share ideas. And sometimes it's like, I can help this person this much, but I need more help. Can you help? And so just working together with people in the community to see how we can all be the church, not just the church of God, but the church. Several people in our church started their own ministries. We have a group of women that started a house for women who are coming out of prison. We have a guy who started a group called Neighbor to Neighbor, and so they'll go help people that need help with their houses. They build ramps for kids that have disabilities. I wanted to be able to support them. Maybe not financially, which we haven't supported most of those financially, but a one-time thing, maybe $1 club, or hey, you need volunteers. Oh, you're having this event, we can advertise. So it's unofficial support. But if they come from our church, whether they go to a foreign field or working in Wichita, I want to be able to encourage and support them. And then I wanted to connect global with local. And Pastor Aaron did a good job of getting that started. It's like we support Hope Ranch in Wichita that works with human trafficking. We support Pink Door in Berlin. We don't officially support anybody with refugees, but we work with several refugees. We support Heart for Lebanon in Lebanon. So how can we tie those in together to follow those different categories?
And after this inventory, you started to kind of look at what, again, you started with what do we have, in some ways somewhat asset-based, what are the methods and resources that we have, and then what are the things in our community and world that you could be connected to? Because that's number 3, what are the needs that you're seeing in your community and world?
And that's where, who are we talking to? Who's walking through our door? What needs are we seeing? Homelessness has been a big issue lately. We had 5 people come in 1 week, 3 people in 1 day that call. So it's an issue, and it's something I think as a church we need to be involved in. So that's one of the areas we saw that need. Foster kids, we worked with foster kids, realizing that, well, one thing, we had somebody in our church again start a ministry because foster kids have to have beds, or biological families have to have beds for the kids if they're involved in that, or the kids are taken away. So he started a bed ministry. So anybody that calls us that needs a bed, we provide a bed. But those came out of things that we saw as needs in the community. Globally, we just helped a church in Pakistan because everything's underwater. And so how can what are the needs around the world? And I think that's number 3, it's like, it seems that the church often gets so focused on our internal ministries that we don't see what's right next door. Again, case in point, we have a lot of wonderful ministries in the church, but we've got people living under the bridge, next door to the church. Most people have no idea that we have people living under the bridge next door to the church. So that was kind of what we're seeing, some of the needs that we're seeing, to work with those who don't have that connection. And I can tell you stories about some of the homeless that, you know, the biggest thing is they don't have a support system. They may not have families, they're on their own. So how can we walk alongside them and help them change their situation? Not just give them a hot meal, which the hot meal's appreciated, but how can we walk alongside and help them be fully functioning?
It talks about number 4, about how you kind of started to pull that together to create some strategy.
And that's where the creativity came in. It's like, okay, I want to support all these people, so how do I make a cohesive argument for how they all fall together? And again, that's where we kind of did the Matthew 25. We took those different categories and looked globally and locally at what we're doing. So we also realized we can't do everything, and that's where we worked with our ministry partners. In fact, a church in Wichita, tiny church, decided they wanted to do a Christmas party for every foster kid in Wichita and their families. Yeah, it was like 800 foster, I can't remember, I think it was 800 foster kids. And so obviously, this he's had that idea since the first time, we can do this. So he reached out to other churches, and now there's several churches involved. And last year they had a Christmas party for 800 kids. Every child got a gift, including the biological kids and the families. They rented a sports arena, but we all did it together. And that just widens so much what you can do. When you're working with ministry partners, we don't have to do it. We can support and encourage, but it's not our ministry, but it's a ministry that the church is involved in.
Yeah. Well, then you start talking about Matthew 25. So I wonder if we switch over to the document on Matthew 25 and talk through what you mean by the Matthew 25 prayer focus and how you kind of laid out the issues that you guys were engaging in and the different ways you wanted the touch points in the church for people.
Okay, and part of this is I worked in higher education, so to me education is very important. And comments I would hear, it's like they just don't know. It's like people seeking asylum or illegals at the border. They're not. They're perfectly legal, but they don't know, you know. Or someone said, when we did human trafficking, and they said, well, who's coming to speak? Well, International Rescue Committee is coming, because a lot of the people being trafficked are from the border or from different places, and the response was, well, I don't have any sympathy for illegals. So, you know, dealing with that kind of mentality, it's like, first I want to say, are you kidding me? But I don't, and you're attacking me. It's like, okay, I have to realize I'm coming from a different place. My experiences have dealt in those areas, so in some ways I'm more aware because I've worked with actually people in those areas. So how can we educate them? And, but that's what I want to do ever since I've been there. And then Abby said, let's do a prayer focus. So not just educating them, but let's learn how to pray for these different groups. So there's 3 components with Matthew 25. The first is learn, and we have professionals in the community. Refugees, we had the International Rescue Committee. We had someone in our church who started working with Afghan refugees, because we had normally about 300 refugees a year. This year they got 900 to Wichita, 80 Afghan families. So they both shared what's happening and there's other organizations, but we tried to pick 2 or 3. And then we also had a refugee, put a face to it, who spent 17 years in a refugee camp in Uganda that shared his story. And my biggest thrill is when I hear people leaving saying, I didn't know that. It's like, of course. So, but that's the first component, and with each one we have professionals in that area. With homelessness, the one that's coming up, we're going to have a panel, but we've got the Union Rescue Mission, we've got Wichita Area Hot Team Homeless Outreach Team, which is the police department and social workers. We have Humankind Ministries that has a lot of shelters, and then Wichita Children's Home Street Outreach. So this is what's being done in our community, but also to address, this is the problem. And this, Wichita is doing a great job with homelessness, but there's still people that fall through the cracks. So it's education, not just, oh, they just don't want to get off the streets, you know. Well, maybe some don't, but why don't they, you know. And so it's education. The second component is prayer, and we have, Abby does a great job doing prayer banners, and we take different topics. With refugees, like pray for those people who are still in the countries trying to get out. Pray for those who are displaced in the country. Pray for the leaders of those countries. Pray for people that are in the refugee camps. Pray for people that have made it to the third country. Pray for the church and people working with them that will be sensitive. So each one has several prayer points. And after the presentation, we have people go from each prayer point and pray for those areas. And then so we have learn, pray, and then the third component is serve. So if people are touched, we've got people right here working in that area. How can you be involved if that's what you want to do? So those are the 3 components. At first, when we came up with the idea, church, higher ups, yeah, go for it. But we didn't get a lot of, hey, this is a great idea. Let's see how it works, you know. And The refugee was our biggest one, which surprised me. We had 30 people register and had 50 people come. So that was a great turnout. But now it's been so good. My boss actually said, maybe you want to do this every month instead of every other month.
Oh,
So,
More work for you?
yeah.
yeah, but we finally got 5 of them done. We'll do the same 5 over again, so that makes it easy. So
Yeah.
I'm just adding a few new ones. But I think it's been very effective in not just learn, pray, and serve, but helping people to see what's being done in the community and what organizations are working with. So that's kind of what we started with. We picked 5 topics, we mentioned those earlier, to start with. And we'll probably add a few others next year. I'm not sure what ones we're looking at things like people coming out of prison, mental health issues, which is a huge issue, especially among homeless right now. So.
And so you have this document here that you guys have in your thing that kind of outlines kind of the issue and then some of the different ways that that you did the learn piece, the pray piece, the serve piece, and then what your kind of results from that were, and then what ministries were a part of those conversations. And I think that's, for me, was really helpful to be able to see that and the ways that you piece those different things together.
And the other thing we did was
way, yeah.
tie it in with our dollar club. We do a dollar club once a month.
So for those who don't know what Dollar Club is, describe
Everybody's
that.
told give $1 for something in the community. Depends on how they feel about it. We've raised from $2,000 to, I think it was $12,000 in one Sunday for a cause. And so we try to tie that into our Matthew 25. With the refugees, a group called Bridges that works with the African refugees was actually started by a woman in our church. And we raised $4,000 for the African refugees. Persecuted Church was about the time of Ukraine. It wasn't exactly persecuted church, but we raised, I think, that was our biggest one, $12,000 to send to ministries in Ukraine to help the persecuted church. So it's trying to tie everything together. And then it's ongoing when people get involved, even though we just spent a month on refugees, a month on whatever the issue is, it's still there.
So then flipping back to the first document, let's jump to the evaluation piece. So this is still new. You're still kind of piecing this out. So as you go through this, these are some of the questions that you're going to ask moving forward, right? Is that kind of what the evaluation piece is?
I think 5, 6, and 7 is basically more questions and answers.
Yeah.
It's like, what do we still need to do? What's working? What isn't working? How do we evaluate it? And I know a lot of the church says, oh, they'll have numbers and statistics, and you can't evaluate relationships, so I struggle with that.
Yeah.
But I know we have to come up with some numbers, so we can say, okay, this is how much money we came up with from Dollar Club, these are how many people attended the sessions, these are people that we know that volunteered, but it's more relational, so it's kind of hard to put those statistics. So how are we going to show what we've accomplished?
Or sharing those stories. I think that's often what we end up having to, trying to move from numbers to stories is a difficult but important move as well.
And that's why at each Matthew 25, we try to have somebody share a story who's been there. We had a woman who'd been trafficked and was willing to share her story. So it's seeing this as a real person, and it makes it more real than just talking about it. So, have we seen the church involved and empowered? What needs to change? What worked well? Like I said, these are just a lot of questions, and this is the first year we've done it, so we'll find out.
Yeah. Well, Sherry, thanks for sharing this. You know, again, one of the things I think is really important about this group is that we all come from different places. We're all in churches that do different kinds of ministry, that engage in different ways, and some churches have full-time people on staff that can sit and process these things, and others feel like I'm a volunteer, I have a full-time job, and I'm trying to do this as I go along. And so as I looked at what you put together, I thought you have some really helpful steps based on kind of here's who we are, here's what we went through. You know, we looked at some goals, we looked at some values, we took an inventory of our relationships, we looked at what the needs were in the community. I just thought, wow, that's a really helpful kind of trajectory for those that may be in the midst of that conversation to give some handles. And then again, I think that one of the biggest roles of anyone in missions is education, because so often we are butting up against, people are hearing narratives about what's happening in the world from so many different sources, and many of them are only sharing things in order to incite some kind of emotional reaction, whether good or bad, to try to get people's emotions, which means that we're missing out on real stories and education of what's really happening. And so to me the combination of the ways that you're processing through your vision and strategy and the way that you're really working towards education, I felt like would just be such a helpful touch point for folks as you're thinking about ways that you're engaging in your churches. And so thank you, Sherry, for taking a little bit of time just to lay that out for us and to be honest that, we're still in the midst of it. It's not finalized, it's new, but that you're working through that and processing through that. Questions, thoughts, engagements?
I was just thinking this whole time, I'm on the opposite end of the spectrum, church size, from where you are. And I'm looking through all this, and like I'm the lead pastor, and I'm the only paid staff person and all that. I have people in leadership stuff, but like looking through this, like this is, to speak to what you just said about the way you've gone through this, and obviously it's a living document on some level, you'll tweak it and stuff, but like it's entirely scalable up or down.
Yeah.
In the way that you do it, because you can say, yeah, it's great to have, you have more ministry, so you need more people, more help, like whatever it is, like you can do these things. This is how, in my mind, I'm looking through this, like, shouldn't we just approach every ministry that we're doing in this fashion, right? Like even like, why am I doing what I'm doing on Sunday morning? But like just like this deal, it's very broadly applicable. And I look at like I'm a small church, but we do these things like this thing. This is how this needs to be approached. I just appreciate like that, whether you intended that or not. It's scalable for a church that is a tenth the size of yours or 10 times the size of yours even, and I would really, really appreciate that.
And resources definitely make a difference. I mean, when I worked at a small university, it's like I was director of career services for 4,000 students and my budget was $2,000. Okay, so what I have to do is find people that have money.
And I've always been told a lot of times it's not about how much you have, but how you use it effectively. And that's what this helps you to use every person, every dollar, think effectively. And so yeah, this is really, really great.
Other thoughts? Yeah, Stephen.
I was going to wait,
Oh,
but
I call
the
this.
evaluation issue is one that we deal with too in terms of the numbers, how you evaluate programs, and how you evaluate effectiveness. And I would recommend a book that was on Sherilyn's staff yesterday, The Infinite Game. It's not really about evaluation, and it's not a book about evaluation, but it is a book about, by Simon Sinek, about the difference between finite games and infinite games. And the church should be about the infinite game. And the goal of the infinite game is not to succeed, it's to stay in the game.
Yeah.
Because winning always comes to an end. And so the only way to continue, and so the only way we can really evaluate our ministries is, are we still in the game making a difference? And so I think that would be a book if you're wrestling with evaluation, I would recommend, but it will not lead you to numbers.
Yeah.
It may lead you to change how you think about your ministry evaluation.
That's good.
I get a copy of all those books.
I took a picture of it, yes, yeah. Yeah, it's a great book. Yeah, Valerie.
I love your the principles that you outline here, and those are awesome to follow. And I'm curious, I know your last principles talk about your church with online space of faith in the church. And I'm curious as to as you get into more of the community development side of things too, like your foster care and activating refugees and trafficking and stuff, where you're maybe moving beyond church partners into local church partnerships that do have different faiths. How have you guys sort of wrestled with that and aligned yourself with some of those organizations and
one thing is, I don't come from a church of God background, so it's been new to me. But I was with Wycliffe; it was non-denominational. I went to Moody; it was non-denominational. So I've worked with a lot of faith groups, and for the most part, as long as there's a core conviction as far as what salvation is, there are a lot of different methods people use. There are a lot of different things, ways they think about things, but I can work with them as long as there's that core value.
Do you work with any groups that are secular in nature, like especially with refugees? Are you working with those that would be non-faith based as well?
Okay, International Rescue Committee obviously is a government organization.
Okay.
We've been fortunate because the people I've met there, well, in fact, one person that came and spoke had been a youth leader in
Okay,
a church. So we've been fortunate that we've worked with Christians in those organizations.
gotcha.
They're not necessarily Christian organizations. And
I will say though that like when they do come in, it is purely on the educational side of it. So that we
Right.
don't look at to them for a, hey, tell us how we should be doing it. It's more of a, what information, what statistics do you have that we can pass on to the people so that they better understand this issue, and then we can take those statistics and information and turn them into the prayer points. And then we take the information and turn it into the faith side of it.
And like I said, Wichita area mission leaders is all denominations. Well, not all denominations, they're all pretty much evangelical. But we have some different beliefs with some of them, but we can really work together well to spread the church in the community. So another organization we work with is Wichita's Littlest Heroes. It is not a Christian organization, but it was started by someone in our church who is a Christian. And that's for kids that have life-threatening diseases. So we don't have them as a community partner that we support monthly, but we definitely support what they're doing in their mission. Does that make sense?
How have you guys dealt with that? Can I turn the question on you?
Yeah.
Because I know you guys work with organizations all across the spectrum.
Yeah, I mean, it's been something that we're definitely wrestling with, so we don't really have the answers. We work a lot now, especially in the African community, with a lot of Islamic centers.
Yeah.
And so we're hosting, part of the space that we're moving into is the whole hospitality space of our church, because we just have like a lot of space, and that's just like, talk about the asset, that's just an asset that we have. So we've been hosting a lot of side workshops and stuff for refugees, and then they want prayer space to pray while they're at their workshop, and so it's like it's wrestling a lot of these things. Like, so we've got a lot of Muslims praying in our church right now. Not wow.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious as like you move into these different kinds of community development organizations where you are beyond the Christian realm, you're more in the government, or you're more in these larger issues, like how the church does wrestle with that.
And then if you don't open your doors to those, you don't build those relationships, and there's no opportunity for conversation. And so there's a huge value in creating those spaces and using the space in that way. But that's.
But if you use that space with a mindset of, we're gonna get them here and then we're gonna turn them into.
Then they'll turn around real quick.
Yeah, that's just not good.
Yeah.
And we don't do that. But like I said, it's an information piece, like Abby said. The best one to address refugees in Wichita is the International Rescue Committee.
Yeah.
It's not a Christian organization, and there are some people there. In fact, a couple of years ago, we had them come to an event we had, and the person in charge was not very positive, but the next person was. So, it's who are you working with? Because we are coming in as a faith-based organization.
Yeah.
Our Mission 25 is going to be based on this prayer. It's our faith, and if they're not comfortable with that, that's okay. They just don't come. So.
I will say that the one part that working with the IRC for the refugee part, we had to come at it as we just want to give information to the people.
Yeah.
We don't want to try to get people to convert them, because when you do work with those kinds of people, they're like, well, we can't do anything with you because you're Christian and you're going to try to change these people. Well, if you go at it with the idea of, we just want to educate our people about what's happening, they're much more open to just giving information instead of being that antagonistic of, well, since you're Christians, like you have to be extra careful because you are going to change people. Yeah. And so it is about approach as well.
And I worked at that a lot when I worked at Wichita State University with international students. I was international student advisor, and there's a strong code of ethics. You do not proselyte. You don't try to convert. So how can we reach students that you're working with? Well, we ended up, I started several different groups. One was Friendship International for Women. So what are we doing to promote the university? We're providing resources in the community for these women, but we partner with International Student Incorporated. That's a Christian organization that works with international students. So it was a fine line, and how do we, as a secular organization and a Christian in a secular organization, how do you work with that? And basically, we had a lot of interesting discussions in that group because we allowed them to present as well. We had information on Ramadan, we had information, but we also could present, this is Christmas, and this is why we believe in Christmas. We partnered them with Christian families, so ways around it, that it's
The
fine.
education thing, I think, like, needs your congregation too, like, so you're coming at it saying, we want to educate you, not like, we're trying to tell you that everyone actually loves you, like, so we want to educate you, that the people are like, oh, you're here to educate us. I imagine they're even more receptive to it at that point also, because it's like, oh, you're telling us what's actually going on.
Exactly, we're trying to keep away from politics.
Even to your people, it's less agenda in that phase anyway, it's just education, so they're like more open to it, and then they get connected maybe when they wouldn't have.
But Valerie, I want to know, is your church aware of the groups that are coming in, and
They are.
and how has reaction been? Has there been any pushback
I think there hasn't been, they don't necessarily know some of the.
that they're praying here?
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like that would be, for some people in a church, that would be a touch point of like.
Yeah. And so we obviously have to limit some of that, but like, it's true, like, you're gonna open your space and there's, those things, but a lot of it is building the relationships with those organizations to where now we really can like deeply partner with them because we've invited them to our space.
Yep.
Can finally coffee for them. It's just like that, now they come to our coffee shop, like just hang out, like, it's so cool. And like one of the workshops actually butted up against one of our nights of worship. And like we had several different people and the organization themselves, the workers in the organization aren't all Muslim, some are Jewish, some are, so they actually, several of them wandered into the sanctuary, like wondering what is going on there and staying for their night of worship. So I mean, because they trust us now, so it's that fine line of like building trust, but yet they clearly know who we are,
Right.
Yeah.
what our belief system is, and we're not trying to convert them, but like, this is why we do what we do.
But hospitality matters, and to invite someone into your space but say, I need you to leave this part of you at the door, that's not hospitality necessarily. And so if you really want someone to feel like they're being welcomed into your space, which, I mean, a sanctuary of all places is supposed to be, I mean, the word sanctuary, being a place of, of safety, like, how do you, that's, what an interesting way that you do that, that's really cool.
Yeah, but the congregation is very supportive of us doing this.
But man, that's...
And there are a lot of challenges.
And there are challenges.
Especially with things being so polarized now. It's like, we have to emphasize, we're not trying to change anybody's mind about what you believe. We just want to give you, this is what's actually happening, and you can make up your own mind.
Some education on hospitality, I think, would be so helpful. You and I were talking about that yesterday with the misreading scripture with Western eyes. One of the pieces that's in there that I didn't touch on was what hospitality means in the Bible and how that often gets missed. So like, for instance, one of the things that I actually had written in my notes, but I moved past it, is that we often read the story of Sodom and Gomorrah as being about people who, we named a sin after it, sodomy, right? But the reality is, if you read that, it's more about inhospitality. It's about the fact that, about the ways that people were not taking care of others. And so we miss those pieces, and so really representing hospitality, I think, is a really cool but challenging thing. And as Christians, we have to figure out what does it mean to really give hospitality to people who think differently than we do.
So this is turning to a little bit of a psychology bend, but I've been doing a lot of research on Bowen systems theory, which is about basically how we deal with anxiety within groups and within systems. And so one of his main principles is this idea that typically when we're all the same, we can remain close until we find differences in ourselves, and then we repel each other, and then we kind of separate. And so what does it look like for us to find and recognize differences in ourselves but still remain close to one another? And that's actually that takes a lot more emotional health and maturity than we ever realize, because our natural thing is, great, we all agree we'll be together, and we're different, so we have to stay apart. And so what does it look like to have very firm demarcations of, we are different, we worship a different God, and we're not going to be, we're not pretending, it's all one God, we're all the same, but to really recognize we are different, but we can still stay in close proximity with one another. And when we start applying this to systems like working with people cross-culturally or cross-religiously, but actually even within our own family systems and our own work environments, it starts to really change and transform the way that we understand the anxieties that are happening in the room and the challenges that are happening within relationships. And so if we can learn to be people that recognize differences and are not scared of those differences, it can really start to transform our ability to hold space and be connected to one another regardless of those differences. So that's been a really, really helpful exploration for me over the past year.
Man, I hope we can get to a point where we're doing that cross-culturally, but we can't even do that within our own family. I feel like, right? I mean, politics, I mean, man.
I will say that like Sherry wanted to focus so heavily on the education, and I think that's a really important part. But when I came in, I was like, but the prayer is what pulled it together. You know, I wanted to do that prayer focus of it because
Create a space where,
it's exactly what you were talking about. It's not so much that you're just learning about it, it's how can you pray for them? Because at that point, you turn it back around onto what is it that makes us different, what makes us the same, and it's God, you know? And so what is it that we can be praying for them to help them, to strengthen them, and to help, you know, bring them back to who He is.
If
And
you're
who He
authentically
created.
seeking God's will for someone and
Yeah.
the Father's heart there, it's gonna be hard to hate them, it's gonna be hard to, but like, you're gonna be more drawn to look at it differently.
And I think we never know what influence we have. Speaking of my Palestinian son, he is still Muslim, but he's very open. He went to church with us.
and he's the one who lived for 6 years.
6 years. He did. But we learned a lot. And he learned a lot. And I think when I talked to him a couple of years ago, he said, every time I speak to a group, I tell them about how this Christian family took me in and made me one of their own. And so, you know, he's still Muslim. He's kind of not Muslim, but he's not anti-Christian. So it's a step in the right direction. So I don't think we realize, sometimes we think, oh, well, that we didn't succeed there, but you don't know when you touch somebody's life and how it can change their life later.
That's right. That's right.
Let's get back to your evaluation thing, and it's something I think about a lot, because I think in the church we get so focused on did we succeed? And the question is did we do the right thing? Were we faithful to what we were called to? The question is never did we succeed. The question is, were we faithful to do what we were called to?
Right.
You were faithful to live out. You have no idea where your son will end up.
Right.
You can't see the end. And so none of us in the course of our ministries can see the end of the ministry. We have no idea what the simple act of a meal, what the simple act of having Muslims in our church praying is going to do in the long term. All we can say, all we can answer is I was faithful.
Right.
I did what God called me to do.
And it's
I did the right thing. That's all we can talk about. And part of it is our culture so focuses on success, and yet this is not the focus of Scripture. The focus of Scripture is faithfulness. Were you faithful?
One of our pastors said something to me that has stuck pretty heavily, is that in our line of work, if we haven't been swindled once or twice, we're not doing it right. You know, you're gonna have people come to the church asking for things, and maybe they're telling the truth, maybe they're lying to you, you don't really know. And God gives us that gut feeling for a reason, you know. But if you haven't been swindled once or twice, you're probably not doing it right. So I just thought that was
Pretty self-respect.
Came out to lemonade.
And that's what, because I'm more of the, I want to help everybody that walks through the door. Sometimes we can, sometimes we can't. Sometimes I say yes when I probably should have said no. But as Pastor Justin said, it's better to say yes when you shouldn't have than no when you should have. So, or vice versa, you know what I mean.
If you're gonna lean too far in one way, lean in the yes,
Right,
lean in the
and
yes,
I know there are times that people have taken advantage, because when I get to know their name in the story, they're then my friends. You know, and that's really hard sometimes when you see things not working, but you know, I've done what I needed to do and have to leave it in God's hands. So.
Any other thoughts?
Yeah, Mike, this is so helpful, thank you.
Thank you for the handouts.
Just a point in comment about, look, we can be local and global ministries, and I never really thought about that before, so that was just that one statement with your camera.
And it's that outside of the box thinking, right, I gotta put it all together, so how can I make it fit?
Yeah. Love that.
Stealing every ounce of this document, no, like, it's really good,
Oh, thank you.
really well put together. And like you said, like, we're still a work in progress, like, you've got a pretty stinking good start, right? I feel like it's really good.
And I know it, when I work at university, I change programs every year, because I look at, oh, well, let's change this. And, it's never, okay, we've done this way forever, it's like, well, let's look and see what works and then modify. Thanks.